Bom dia a todas e todos. Bem-vindos ao 8º Encontro Internacional de Política Social, sediado na Universidade Federal do Espírito Santo. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 8th International Social Policy Meeting in Universidade Federal do Espírito Santo, University of Espírito Santo. Today, we will discuss about with our invitees, Professor Qin Chi, Professor Sit Tsui, and their expositions will be commented by Professor Bruno De Conti. We will have since 11 o'clock to be together, and we will listen to Professor Sitsui during 50 minutes to 1 hour. After her, we will hear to Professor Lao Qin-Chi during 30 minutes or 40 minutes. After them, Professor Bruno Martarello De Conti will comment their expositions during 20 to 30 minutes. After all of this, we will open our meeting to interventions by the public. Our table is named China's New Development Challenges. And that's our team, China's New Development Challenges. I will present quickly our participants, our professors, and since I've done that, they begin their expositions. Professor Sitsui is Associate Professor of Institute of Rural Reconstruction of China at Southwest University at Chongqing, China. She is also visiting professor here at University of Espírito Santo. Professor Lao Qin-Chi is professor at Global University for Sustainability and the Department of Cultural Studies at Lingnan University, Hong Kong, China. And Professor Bruno Martarello De Conti is professor of the Institute of Economics at Unicamp, and he's also a researcher of a group at Unicamp specialized in studies of the relations between Brazil and China. So I'm honored to invite Professor Sitsui to begin the expositions. Professor Sitsui, please.
Thank you very much. I prepare PowerPoint and I will share the screen. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Perfectly, yes.
Yeah, and then I will start now. First of all, thank you very much for your invitation. And Qin-Chi and I actually belong to the same team, and our recent research products has been published on monthly review in October issue. The main title is China 2020. And so I will present our research funding. The first one, we have to encounter Cold War, the sparring between the United States and China in the name of trade war, which has lately extended to telecommunications, social media, finance, and diplomacy, is heralding a renewed Cold War in the 21st century, While the Cold War may have formally ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union, post-Second World War hot wars never ceased in some regions of the world, especially in research-rich areas such as Central Asia and North Africa. Since the 1990s, China's continuous integration into globalization, following the logic of the market and international rules, has also meant, in some sense, the disintegration of the Cold War's two camps. The whole world has come under one system of capitalist globalization. Cold War demographic resurfaced after the United States triumphant wars in Iraq, Libya, and other Middle Eastern and North African countries, as well as following Obama's high-profile return to the Pacific and Donald Trump's escalations. Situating himself in the center of the world, Trump has foregrounded the strategic goal of one world, two systems to isolate China from the rest. With China now the primary U.S. rival, the United States has unsurprisingly attempted to contain China by any means necessary, including attacking Chinese telecommunication companies like Zhongxin and Huawei, exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic to base China and whip up a vibrant xenophobia, forcing China's consulate in Houston to close and banning Chinese 5G development projects and social medias such as TikTok and WeChat. Due to the outbreak of COVID-19 and the US stock market crash, the Federal Reserve continued to print money, launching a massive $700 billion quantitative easing on March 15, 2020, then announcing an open-ended commitment to keep buying assets under his quantitative easing measures. On March 19, 2020, the Federal Reserve announced the establishment of contemporary US dollar liquidity arrangements, scrutinized with 9 more central banks. These new facilities will support the provision of US dollar liquidity in amounts up to 60 billion each for the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Banco Central de Brazil, the Bank of Korea, the Banco de Mexico, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and the Swedish Reserve Bank, and 30 billion each for the Denmark's National Bank, the Nordic Bank, and the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. These US dollar liquidity arrangements will be in place for at least 6 months. You find that the US dollar still dominates the global reserves. It accounts of nearly 62% of the global reserves. And the second one is euro, around 20%. 21%, and also the renminbi actually only nearly 2%. So you find that the US dollar is still dominates the global reserve. And this picture shows you that there's a threat of the US dollar flooding because this is the new round of quantitative easing, that means QE. And we have to, particularly from the perspective of Global South, we have to be alert to this kind of QE because it means the new round of the exploitation of US dollar to the Global South. And this picture also shows you since the 2009, the financial assets price actually a lot in the 3,000 is much higher than the real economy price, and then if you find that the commodity even less than zero is a negative. So you find that why this so huge amount of the hot money go to the financial sector rather than the real economy. This is one of the main challenges of particularly for the developing countries like China. And we could like to follow Sami Amin's concept of new delinking. And during the 1960s, China was effectively excluded from the two major camps, the Soviet camps and the US camp. For about 1 decade, before China reconciled with the United States and rejoined the United Nations in 1971, China was obliged to seek development within its own borders and thereby achieve some extent of delinking, as Sami Amin called it, a refusal to submit to US Eurocentric globalization and embrace of a people's agenda of development. After the normalization of foreign relations in the early 1970s, China once again brought in foreign capital. By the late 1990s, China had, by and large, been integrated into globalization, importing raw materials, exporting manufactured goods and services, joining financialization, and beginning to extend its industrial and service production capacities through the Belt and Road Initiative. After it became explicitly targeted as the primary rival of the United States, however, China began to be confronted with increasing sanctions, which coupled with the global crisis of the COVID pandemic, have led to the collapse of global industrial trend. Even though the Chinese government may not be prone to seeking delinking, the situation may want moves towards delinking and searching for alternatives with ups and downs along the way. China's stock market has failed to fulfill its supposed function, namely to effectively channel excessive liquidity into the real economy to promote industrial upgrading. After the 2015 crash, hot money seeking profitably left stock markets and rushed into other speculative sectors, the most prominent being real estate. As real estate price in major cities skyrocket, people are less and less able to afford living there. To compound the problem, local governments have developed a dependency on land and real estate as source of revenue. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, the total value of new estate in 70 major cities in China amounts to 62 trillion in 2018, more than that of the United States, European Union, and Japan combined. Meanwhile, the value of Chinese stock markets was merely 1/10 of the value of these three geographic entities. And now we are facing a financial trap. The most prominent features of the situation between 2013 and 2018 was the government's failure to reverse the trend of the economy's financialization. China's money supply mechanism in the last 20 years has relied heavily on the inflow of foreign currencies. By regulation, all foreign exchange floating into China must be sold to the central bank, and the money base is expanded accordingly. Therefore, enormous trade surplus is put into the rapid expansion of the money base, M0, from RMB 3 trillion in 2008 to more than 8 trillion in 2018, while M2 ranked from 40 trillion in 2007 to 182 trillion. This is also renminbi in December 2018. Liquidity has increased without a corresponding growth in the real economy. During this period, the expansion rate of M2 was almost twice the gross domestic product growth rate. Furthermore, the defects in the monetary conducive mechanism have made it difficult for small and medium enterprise in the real economy to obtain credit from banks. Faced with the declining profit rates in manufacturing and the real economy, capital went into speculative sectors such as the stock and real estate markets. Consequently, China experienced great frustration in stock and real estate markets from 2013 to 2018. This crisis is essentially the institutional cause of China being incorporated into global financialization under the pressure of excess financial capital. There is an apparent distortion in Chinese citizens' wealth portfolio structure. According to a survey, the net value of housing property constituted 66.35% of Chinese household wealth in 2017. Mortgages expense may stark household dry of consumption power. The growth of citizens' disposable income has lagged behind economic growth, and household savings have even started to decline. Real estate has become an unbearable burden on Chinese society and the economy. Cornering the Chinese government, the real estate bubble must be restrained from growing further, but a crash in real estate price would equally be a disaster. The stock market crash of 2015 did not halt the financial frenzy. Financial products and derivatives have continued to grow largely. The value of total assets managed by various financial institutions in 2018 amount to more than 100 trillion this is renminbi. With a weak economy and declining profitability, it is reasonable to be worried about the exponential growth of financial investment and a possible Ponzi scheme scenario. The rapid financialization in the last decade has reshaped the Chinese economy, increasingly giving it traits of a casino economy. And this is the figure showed you that the foreign exchange reserves in China from 2012 to 2020. And you find that these because of the market crash in 2015 to 2016, and then we lost almost 1/3 of foreign exchange reserves. So it's a really huge loss. Hot money also found its way into e-finance along with the rapid development of the internet. Since its birth in 2011, the total transaction volume of e-finance has grown over renminbi 17.8 trillion. In July 2018, many P2P platforms shut down with an estimated total loss of up to renminbi 1 trillion. At the end of 2017, the total value of the Chinese financial sector's assets amounts to renminbi 250 trillion, the highest in the world. In addition, debt expansion is always concomitant with financialization, as debt and finance are two faces of the same coin. At the end of 2000, the total balance of credit in China financial system was renminbi 9.9 trillion. In July 2014, it grew to renminbi 78.02 trillion, an increase of 688%, while the nominal gross domestic product growth was merely 473%. The expansion of credit is clearly greater than the growth in the real economy. Multinational capital, especially US capital and Chinese capital elites, have benefited the most from China's incorporation into global economy. All this has occurred through ecological degeneration and extraction of surplus labor from surplus value from neighbor. While China appears to demonstrate substantial development, China's industry is nevertheless still highly dependent on the more advanced countries. Multinational corporations take the largest share of the added value created in China. In its financial sector, China still largely retains its sovereignty, which incurs discontent from foreign financial capital hoping to seek higher profitability in the country. However, for the last 2 years, the Chinese government has seemed to be losing its grip on foreign financial capital flow. The China Securities Regulatory Commission announced that it effected the elimination of a foreign equity kept in security companies starting on 1st of April in 2020. The previous practice for the maximum foreign shareholdings percentage was 49, later 51, and now 100%. And this is two news about how the foreign financial capital have great interest to enter financial markets in China they expect to earn a lot of profit from financial market in China. For example, the JP Morgan has announced that it plans to eventually own 100% of its security business in China. And then they announced that the financial industry in China has a value of 45, this is US dollar 45 trillion financial industry. And on the other hand, the global hedge fund giant Bridgewater, the co-chairman Ray Dalio also announced that he expects the country China, that means China, strengths in the financial area will grow when it opens financial market to overseas participants. He said that about 60% of all domestic assets are now accessible to foreign investor, up from just 1% in 2015. So this kind of foreign capitals target on Chinese financial market. So we should be alert to this kind of financial capital. And on the one hand, the Chinese government seemingly open door to oversee financial capital. On the other hand, it also control the capital flow. It's exercise again capital control because several days ago, China halted Ant's IPO, the initial public offering in Shanghai and Hong Kong. Ant's group belongs to Alibaba Group, and this is a fintech giant, and it is also China's largest online provider of microfinance service. And it is this news aroused a lot of controversy because it shows that Chinese government tried to avoid a kind of financial exploitation because the Ant Group proposed a higher interest rate when they imposed the high interest rate in two projects, online finance project. That means Ant Check Later and also Ant Cash Now. These two online finance projects, it charged higher interest rate than state-owned banks. So this is also a kind of usury. And this is also a huge debate about whether it is a a kind of debt economy, because many clients of these two projects of online finance are young people. So this is also a question, how we avoid the young generation, prevent them from being trapped in consumerism and also debt economy. And also one of the reasons, one of the reason of the controversy is also because of this ends group actually is domestic private capital, but with a lot of investment from overseas capital. So it's again so that Chinese government try to control the both foreign and domestic capital flow. During the August this year, Ants Group was expected will become the top 4 global financial firm in the world, just after Bank of America and ICBC, that means Chinese bank, and JP Morgan. So it's really it is really a threat to the state-owned banks, because in the world, now the top 10, even the top 20 banks in the world, China accounts for the seven banks, and then the top 4 belongs to China state-owned banks, not private banks, not private financial institution like Alibaba or the Ants Group. So the IPO Ants Group is really a threat to the state-owned banks. And however, along with the trend of financialization, we also find that we have the opportunity to project an initiative of de-dollarization. U.S. global interest is sustained by dollar hegemony, a legacy of the Bretton Woods system and post-Bretton Woods regime. The dollar has yet to be challenged as the global reserve currency and the default currency of international trade and settlement. Nowadays, as the very money is secured almost solely by the credibility of the state behind it, the value of US dollar is well secured by the unquestioned military dominance and political stability of the United States. It is still the preferred foreign exchange reserves. Many countries stock to stabilize their own currency. With the rise of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency, it seems that an alternative global currency and international settlement system has eventually become conceivable and viable after more than 70 years of US dollar hegemony. Nevertheless, decentralized cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin seem to be speculative fads boosted by the ideological fantasy of the Austrian school rather than practical tools to improve the economic well-being of the people. Blockchain technology has yet to solve the trilemma of decentralization, credibility, and cost. However, we should not underestimate the significance and impact of cryptocurrency issued by big financial institutions or information technology giants, which may pose a threat to sovereign currency, especially of small economies. Furthermore, if the United States comes up with a crypto dollar, then dollar hegemony may rise to a new level. It might mark the end of financial sovereignty of most of the countries in the world, other than the United States. It is against these backdrops that China has recently and prominently embraced the potentials of blockchain and cryptographic technology. As a leader in electronic payment, China has been researching its own digital currency electronic payment, more than the simple digitalization of money for nearly 6 years. Digital currency electronic payment, digital currency electronic payment, is supposed to replace M0, material currency or cash, and is patched to the renminbi as a legal tender. It is generated by a centralized model and being the only legal digital currency in China. It's exclusive. That means it's under the state control. Moreover, combined with big data, digital currency electronic payment may improve the effectiveness of the central bank's monetary policies. The is and low cost of the transfer of the digital currency electronic payment is expected to promote the renminbi as a global currency. The race for post-dollar hegemony is on. But how the global economic and financial regime is going to be reshaped is still unclear. One thing is certain, a seismic change is taking place. At the domestic level, would the emergence of digital currency improve the efficiency, transparency, and credibility of industrial and financial change and make financial finally serve the real economy? Or would it unleash a new round of speculative frenzy? The Xi Jinping administration has returned to counter-cyclical measures by creating effective demands. In July 2020, to deal with the breakup of global supply chain and the economic downturn, the central government proposed establishing a new development pattern centered on internal circulation and speed up a dual circulation group model in which internal circulation and international circulation promote each other. Internal circulation implies the domestic economy, particularly the rural economy. Local governments invested about renminbi 34 trillion into new infrastructure projects such as 5G, internet, industrial internet, cloud computing, blockchain, data center, smart computing centers, and smart transportation. Another important policy is that of rural revitalization, which aims to foster an eco-friendly economy as an alternative development strategy. Hence the slogan, Green Mountains is Gold Mountain. Clean River is Silver River. One of the major strategies of rural revitalization is the variation of natural resources in villages, as well as what is referred to as the capital deepening of the eco-economy to resolve the crisis of excess money supply caused by trade surplus and inflow of foreign capital. China's current economic and monetary moves are part of its proactive efforts to steer away from decades of developmentalism in line with the Western model of modernization. Many beautiful villages are understood to constitute a beautiful China. The national development strategy is gradually shifting toward inclusive sustainable development that is resource efficient and eco-friendly. The official policy of ecological civilization, rural revitalization, and poverty eradication are essential strategies of transformation. Developing a cooperative economy is key to rebuilding a robust rural society, which serves as an antidote to the risk-based and risk-accumulating urban economy. Based on principles and practice of a cooperative economy, peasants can organize themselves, which in turn can consolidate the foundations of rural governance. The localized capitalization of rural resource based on cooperatives may also help shape strong and healthy domestic demand. And our research team recently will publish a book called The 10 Crisis in China. And we argue that for the last 70 years, whether China can transfer the economic crisis to rural sector will have a soft landing. That means our society enjoy to a certain extent stability. And in that sense, the rural sector is the first priority to let the China avoid economic crisis and reactivate is the society be resilient again. And the legacy of Chinese land revolution of 1949, that means small peasantry and village ownership of land resources, still exists. On 1st of March in 2019, when explaining a policy for integrating small peasants into modernized agriculture, Han Jun, Vice Minister of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, admitted that China is still a big country with millions of small peasants. Now there are 230 million peasant households. Each household has, on average, 7.8 mu of arable land. 1 hectare is equal to 50 mu. Small peasants account for 98% of the agency of agriculture activities and 90% of agriculture workers. The amount of arable land that small peasants cultivate accounts for 70% of all arable land. From 2017 to 2019, the Central Agricultural Commission and Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs organized an assessment and verification process of rural collective properties countrywide. As of the end of 2019, there were 5,695 townships, 602,000 villages, and 2,385,000 production groups, amounting to a total of 2 million, nearly 3 million units, collective units across the country with collective access. It is reported that the rural collectives with a total area of 6.55 billion mu have enormous access. The book value of assets was renminbi 6.5 trillion. There are 11,000 wholly owned enterprise of rural collectives, with total assets of renminbi 1.1 trillion. Moreover, the proportion of fixed assets was close to half of the book value at renminbi 3.1 trillion, 2/3 of which were fixed assets used for public services such as education, technology, culture, and health. Furthermore, the assets were highly concentrated at the village level, with village level assets totaling renminbi 4.9 trillion, or 75.7% of total assets. In the post-globalization crisis, China is facing double assets, both of industrial capacity and of capital. Chinese political and economic elites feel compelled to expand their presence in the world, but the world has changed. After decades of globalization and neoliberalism, many protests against their process have emerged worldwide. Ecological degeneration and climate catastrophe demonstrate the limits of the prevailing growth model. Even if Chinese elites emphasize that China is merely seeking equal and bilateral cooperation for development opportunities, the United States has the unchallenged unipolar power of the last 30 years, naturally regards it as a challenge to its hegemony. Every move by a big country like China will be understood as a transaction against the presence of the dominant geopolitical power. Advancing with an expansionist strategy in the post-globalization age, China is facing vigorous competition and the hostilities of a new Cold War. And recently, there's a new trade agreement was signed on 15 November 2020. This is called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This is a big difference from the previous TPP. And we find that in RCEP, there's no more the United States and also the pro-US allies. In the RCP, this is the ASEAN 10 countries plus the East country, China, South Korea, Japan, and also New Zealand and Australia. So this is viewed or big threat to the pro-US alliance in terms of free trade agreement. So because this new trade agreement accounts for nearly 30% of world trade and also the 38% of the world economy. So let's wait and see how this kind of new regeneration integration is this a sign of the end of globalization or the end of US globalization? Let's wait and see. And the alternative option are neither isolationism or the autarky. A more intelligent strategy would be to turn inward and narrow the gap between the urban and the rural, the rich and the poor, and different regions and different sectors. If China persists in strategy of rural revitalization, determined to pursue the path of ecological civilization, is here to for capacity to deal with global crisis might retain intact. The official policy of rural revitalization and Sannong, that means peasants, agriculture society, and the rural society, peasant, rural society, and agriculture, that means Sannong. Ecological civilization is very important, particularly because the government spend money on public infrastructure improvements in rural and remote areas, which means the investment are for the physical economy and public assets, not for the speculative and bubble economy. Yet, the core values of globalization and developmentalism, such as survival of the fittest and an orientation toward profit-making, are still dominant. The current pandemic, however, gives the Chinese government and people an opportunity to explore alternative ways society can rescue itself from such frameworks. And during the pandemic, we emphasize the importance, and also we find the opportunities of the grassroots mobilization and revival of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. The Chinese government provided free treatment for COVID-19 patients. In the same spirit, bottom-up involvement cannot be ignored, including grassroots mobilizations, community building, and local governance. Fighting coronavirus has also been a process of reflection and politicalization to resist the privatization pressures of hospitals for profit making, to defend the public healthcare system, as well as to criticize the myth of modern Western medicine and revisit the subjugated knowledge of Chinese traditional medicine. And we try to emphasize that the China can reactivate the mass mobilization, and also to contain COVID-19. One of the main reasons because we they still maintain the communist legacy. That means the land revolution of 1949, because the majority peasants have their land and house in the countryside, and also they have their own food. They don't need to depend on the market, and that means they have food and also space to let them practice the social distancing and also self-sufficiency during the pandemic. And you find that these two pyramids of stability in China, you find that the state control 70% of financial sectors. That means the state-owned bank still control the financial sector, and that's why they cannot avoid any private financial institution become larger and larger and become powerful. That means it's really a threat to not only to not only to the state but also to the whole country, because the whole country will be exploited from this large or giant financial institution. And in this in this pyramid of society, you find that the base was the 60% of the peasants. They have their own house and also a small plot of land in the countryside. That means to secure their basic livelihood. So why China still enjoy the stability? Because it's still allow the majority of peasants, particularly peasants, can have access to land, have access to food, have access to job opportunity. And now the Chinese government try to channel the surplus capital and labor into the rural society. And according to Fighting COVID-19, China in Action, this is a white paper issued by China State Council Information Office in June 2020. As of 31st of May, a total of renminbi 162.4 billion had been allocated by governments of all levels to fight the virus. The medical bills of 58,000 inpatients with confirmed infections has been settled by basic medical insurance, with a total expenditure of renminbi 1.35 billion, or renminbi 23,000 per person. The average cost for treating COVID-19 patients in severe condition surpassed renminbi 150,000. And in some critical case, the individual cost exceeded renminbi 1 million, all covered by the state. From January 24th, Chinese New Year Eve, to 8th of March 2020, the government varied 346 national medical teams, consisting of 42,600 medical workers and more than 900 public health professionals to Hubei province and Wuhan city. It also mobilized 40,000 construction workers and several thousand sets of machinery and equipment to build 2 hospitals. The construction of the 1,000-bed Huosenshan Hospital was completed in 10 days, and that of the 1,600-bed Leisenshan Hospital in 12 days. Trade unions, communist youth league organizations, women federations, and other mass organizations mobilized among the general public to get involved in coronavirus prevention. And this picture shows you that in Wuhan, those community workers, they are volunteer. They try to help deliver food to the communities because of the lockdowns. And also, not only food, they also deliver medicine, particularly TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. And also, they did the door-to-door the temperature check-up. They are all volunteers, and this is in many countries, many villages. They practice the village blockade or village lockdown by themselves, not by government. You see, they act as a guard at the entrance of their villages to prevent the people's flow and people or social interactions. And also they construct those kind of rock barriers and to exercise this kind of the blockade. And one local example of how grassroots mobilization coped with broader structural reforms, how the rural China through the coronavirus pandemic can be found in Yongxin village, Baishui Township, Jiangxi province, whose Luxia Wandi Women's Mutual Aid Credit Union we have worked with since 1994. The village has a population of about 2,500. Huang Hualian, 54 years old, is both a chairperson of the credit union and is the head of women affairs of the Yongxin Village Committee. In an interview through WeChat, she told us that her village was locked down for 2 months. The village cadets and volunteers worked together, taking shifts at checkpoints, making daily home visits, and recording everyone's temperature. They did not have food problems because they grew rice and vegetables on their land. Since the land revolution of 1949, the village enjoys a certain degree of self-sufficiency because peasants has access to land resources and grain production. Furthermore, peasants have access to telecommunications like cell phone and Wi-Fi thanks to the new socialist countryside policy of 2005 to 2008. The policy of rural revitalization has helped defend peasant rights to collective ownership, socialized management, and self-governance. As an old Chinese saying remarks, to avoid a small disturbance, stay in a city. To avoid a big upheaval, stay in a village. And this picture was sent by our friends Wang Hualian, and you find that they did the home visits door to door, and then you see that every villager, every peasant has their own house, has their own land, and another possibility during the pandemic is the revival of traditional Chinese medicine. Another possibility of the mystifying modernization happened when effective modern Western medicine were absent in dealing with COVID-19. This allowed the Chinese government and people to revisit and recognize the importance of traditional medicine based on passed down wisdom, popular reception, and inexpensive local herbs. In China, traditional medicine has been dismissed and often subjugated to Western medicine because of the dominant ideology of modernization and Westernization. Previously, traditional medicine proved effective during the SARS outbreak of 2003, with many cases of recovery. However, overall, this has been suppressed, subject to the regulation applied to Western medicine. And during the pandemic, this formulation, 莲花清瘟胶囊, it becomes the effective treatment of the pandemic, and is composed of 13 herbal components. And you find that this is a gift from Overseas Chinese Student and Scholar Association. And then you find that 莲花清瘟胶囊 is included in this gift package. On 25th of March in 2020, the State Council Information Office held a press conference in Wuhan, Hubei province to introduce the important role of traditional Chinese medicine and a list of effective drugs in COVID-19 pandemic prevention and control. It was reported that a total of 74,187 COVID-19 patients, or 91.5% of the total confirmed case nationwide, have been treated with traditional medicine. Among them, 61,449 were from Hubei, accounting for 90.6% of confirmed cases in the epicenter province. Clinical observations showed that the overall effective rates of traditional medicinal treatment reached over 90%. Not only is traditional Chinese medicine recognized as scientific, effective, and low cost, but so are ancient and popular health exercise like Tai Chi, 8 silken movements, 3-1-2 Mediterranean exercise, acupuncture, massage, and pressure point application. This is just one example of opportunities for subjugated knowledges and practices to be surfaced as both a critique of and an alternative to dominant Western discourse, practice, and institution. This is Ba Duan Jing. It means 8 silken movements. It's a set of healthy exercise, and it's a very popular healthy exercise in China. And this is one 3-1-2 Mediterranean training methods. And this is kind of Chinese style massage. You see that these patients also receive this massage from the medical workers. Now I give you the concluding remarks. The escalation of the new Cold War offers an opportunity to rethink China's dependence on an export-oriented economy and speedy financialization. The Chinese government and people may still have a long way to go before carrying out a clear strategy of delinking and turning to the socialist transformation of society and the economy for self-reliance and socio-economic and ecological justice. However, the current articulation of the official policy of ecological civilization, internal circulation, and rural revitalization have come with their own flow of funds and resources to the physical economy and rural society. In order to be effective, this top-down attempt to reverse neoliberal globalization must be integrated with bottom-up popular participation. In this conjuncture, COVID-19 provides an opportunity for grassroots efforts to engage in building an alternative social fabric to recover people's rights to health care and medical knowledge production. In the life and death struggle, more and more people are becoming politicalized by confronting the problems of expensive Western medicine and commoditified health care. It is also an opportunity for more people to revisit traditional Chinese medicine and to seek alternatives that value life over profit. As people experience process of self-organization, they will also become more involved in political debates and mobilize for social change, paving the way for the regeneration of communities, both urban and rural. As top-down and bottom-up movements are integrated into a path of delinking and begin to chart alternatives for the reorganization of society, new possibilities will always emerge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sitsui. I thank you on behalf of the organizing commission of this event. They asked me to thank you and to thank Professor Lau Qingqi and Professor Bruno. And now we invite Professor Kinchi to also talk to us.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It must be very early for you. And thank you for coming to the seminar. We have been having a lot of dialogues and collaborations with UFES, between UFES and the Lingnan University in Hong Kong and the Southwest University in China. And also Professor Nakatani is also a founding member of the Global University for Sustainability. And so we had also had the pleasure of having Professor Nakatani in Hong Kong for 3 months, where we had a lot of exchanges about the current status of Brazil and China, so that we could also try to look at the common challenges that we face. So today's, you just heard from Professor Sid, there are a lot of figures, so it could take a bit of time to look at the drafts, the figures, and to see about the trends that China has been taking. I think for us, when we talk about new development challenges, then everybody, of course, will talk about the question of the pandemic. And I think we can come to that later. And I would expect that maybe in the dialogue we are having after I speak, then we will be sharing more of our experiences, especially to see how people's alternatives could come up, and how there could be a cross-border solidarity between the peoples of Asia and of Latin America. So if we talk about the China, then usually China is presented as a miracle for development. So after the first 30 years of the Chinese Revolution between 1949 and 1979, there was this, China was somehow being blocked first by the Western powers led by the US, Europe, and then later, then there were also the disputes between China and the Soviet Union. So for about 10 years, China was basically, standing on its own, trying to look for a way of development. So that was, but of course we see that China could not escape being part of the configurations of global global rivalries, in geopolitical rivalries. So in a way, even though we have been told about all the differences between capitalism and communism, between countries ruled by capitalist parties or communist parties, sometimes if we look at the realities, we find that there could we could be taking different approaches instead of taking this black and white dichotomy to try to understand what was going on. So in the first 30 years of China's development, which was the basis of China's opening and reform in 1979, we see that there was China was for some time being isolated from both the Western Bloc and the Soviet Bloc. And but then the changes globally, especially in the 1960s, in the late 1960s, with all the revolts around the world, with Che Guevara, with the French, the May student uprisings, with the Cultural Revolution, etc. Then we also see that in these changes, then China was being invited to rejoin the global so-called citizenship. First by the US, So that was what we knew about the table tennis, diplomacy, etc. in the early 1970s. So I think when we look at China, then we can, of course, we have to look at its development within its borders. But then at the same time, we have to situate it in the global balance of powers, in the kind of alliances that were formed, in the kind of rivalries, and where it was placed. So if we look at it that way, then in the post Second World War period, then the Soviet Union was the main rival of the hegemonic US bloc. So in the 70s, then China was being invited to rejoin, and so that the US could be focusing its strength, its forces on the Soviet Union. Then when we saw that after the 1990s, when there was the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and then there was also the changes in Eastern Europe, and also at the same time, all what was happening also around the world with the struggles against the military dictatorships, whether they were in Korea or in Latin America or in Thailand, then we see a shift in the kind of geopolitics. And actually, if we look back, then we see that there were already discussions about the yellow peril. That is, the yellow meaning the yellow color, the skin color of the Chinese. So there were already such ideological propaganda and also ideological formulations starting to pose China as the threat for the whole world. That all started to emerge after the Soviet Union collapsed, and then was seen as not posing such a serious threat to the global hegemonic order. But then because of what was happening in the Middle East, and then later on with the there were the Iraq-Iran wars, there was the later on the 9/11 incidents. So these also then started to put the focus of the rivalry and contention away from China. So in the Chinese circles, some people analyzing this development had said that, well, it had been fortunate for China to have escaped being the main rival, being defined as the main rival of the USA in the 90s or in the early 2000s. But then we see that since Obama's office, then there was this we see this change in the strategy of the US. So there was quite a high-profile return to the Asia Pacific by the US hegemony. And so then we started to see tensions escalating in the Asia Pacific. And so there would be, and it was in this context that there were possibilities for North and South Korea to reconcile. But then that reconciliation, even if it had taken place, then may not mean peace in Asia. It could only mean a real alignment of forces so that the US could better target China in its in trying to contain China's rise in global strength. So in that sense, then if we look at the rivalry between US and China in recent years, especially since last year with the Huawei, even with also the current escalations in Taiwan, in the South Seas. So this would not be surprising if we can look at it as not something that China could itself chart. This path is being charted by the US taking the hegemony. And so if we look at the RAND report, that is the rightist Republican kind of a report, then already 4 or 5 years ago, they were already writing this report to say that to think, they said, to think the unthinkable, which was how would it turn out, what could be the outcome of a war fought between China and the US, of course, started by the US. And so in that scenario, if there's an intensive war that would last for over 1 or 2 years, then the anticipated outcome would be that China's economy would be reduced by 1/3, whereas the US economy would also be losing by about 10%. So it was I think if we have to be looking at what is happening now between in the rivalry between China and the US, we have to look at the US strategies throughout all these years, from the end of the Second World War, to see where its interest lie and where it feels its hegemony being threatened. So of course, when the US places China as the main rival, as the main opponent, it does not mean that the US will be aligning unconditionally with Europe or with other places. So we see the what Donald Trump has been doing. While he's trying to bash on China, then occasionally he would also be clubbing India or Europe or other countries in terms of his trade war. And so I think that is the global context that we need to look at. And I feel that in this context, China has been put on the defensive because if we look at China's development for the last 40 years, its strategy outside of China has been one of economic adventures or economic ventures. So China has been going out to try to lease land, to try to buy up different banks, or to try to think of the Belt and Road Initiative, etc. But then we can see that China has never been able to do this accompanied by its military power, which is something that if we compare to the US, then we see that the way US has been getting all its interests being backed by its military power. So if we look at it from this perspective, then China has been on the defensive, first starting with the China-US trade war, and then later on escalating into the questions about this ban on selling China high technology, etc. And what's happening recently with TikTok, for example, then I think that is also something which is quite eye-opening. So, well, in the name of national defense, then well, the US simply bans TikTok and says that unless you sell it to us, then you have to to close down. So, if of course many people are talking about the presidential elections now, and maybe it's highly likely that Biden would become the president, although there are still uncertainties as to what would be unfolding within the USA. Still, for myself, I do not see a major shift in US strategies towards China or in its global geopolitics, and or in its defense of the US financial conglomerates, the financial interests, etc. So despite all this rhetoric about the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, I feel that we can see the same logic, although manifested maybe in different priorities or in different manners. So I think that would be the main challenge that China has to face, and then it's not starting now. It has started for about a decade, escalating into the last 2 years. So if we take a close look at all the agreements of trade signed between China and the US, then China was actually agreeing to all these clauses by exchanging the term that the US would not impose more tariffs. So US says, I will impose a heavier tariff on you. And so if you would buy all this grain from us, wheat from us, beef from us, and all this, then I will not be imposing a higher tariff, but I will still keep my tariff at a certain. So in this is not at all any kind of equal exchange. It is an agreement being fought very hard for from the China side to try to get the best it felt it could get. So that is, I think, about the what is new about the presidential elections in the US and how that could be affecting China and US relations. And yet I feel that in China, there are a lot of controversies. Some people feel that, it's not, China has been following all these rules by the WTO, by the WHO, and all these, fulfilling all these agreements. So we have demonstrated our sincerity, so you shouldn't see us as a threat. So the problem is only with Donald Trump. It is this person who has ambition, who is always vacillating. So maybe when he's gone, then with Joe Biden, who looks like more a gentleman, at least a gentleman more in appearance compared to Donald Trump, then maybe China and US relations could improve. So there are a lot of, I think not a lot, maybe some illusions within China about possibilities that could turn up after the new president comes in in the US. But but then I think one thing that has come out quite well from the last 2 years in this contest between China and the US is that there was a very, very strong pro-US sentiment within China ever since the reform. So the people looked up to the American way of life, and Chinese students, graduate students, would want to go to the US to study. I don't know how many students you have in UFES from China, but then if you look at, I'm sure you'll be getting more students there, because now the US is trying to ban students from going there, because anyone who's Chinese could be suspected as a spy, as an agent. So, so there are now more rules to ban Chinese students from going to the US to study. They are closing a lot of the Confucius Institutes in the US. So, well, I hope there will be more students coming to Brazil and also learning from you about the realities and about the alternatives. So in the last 2 years, I think what has been something positive is this disillusionment with the US. And I think the reason why people would see the US as the model is because ever since 1950s, that is over half a century ago, then the ideal for China is to develop and catch up with the US and with the UK. But of course, the UK has been declining, so the US has been the example to follow. And so despite all the ideological differences, etc., then in China's pursuit of modernization, the model to follow is the European model, then which is after the Second World War, the US model. So this kind of, so even if there had been propaganda of the government during maybe the Cultural Revolution in the 60s or in the 70s about all the evils of capitalism, the corruption, etc., then as soon as China opened up for the reform, then you will see that the talk about gaining a citizenship card in the global scene meant getting, well, access to the US or, well, at least if not migrating there, then at least going there for travel to see New York, to see Las Vegas, etc., etc. But then this and so this placing US as the center of the world, being and also seeing the US as the more advanced model to follow, this has been quite mainstreamed among the middle class, especially among the intelligentsia, especially. So and then that has to do maybe not so much about what the US is actually practicing or teaching. It has to do with a more underlying pursuit for development, and development placing US as the big brother, as the big leader, well, being on the first, ranking the first in this whole long line of developed and developing countries. But then in the last 2 years, then what has been something positive is that there has been more and more disillusionment with the US, especially with the very honest and blunt comments and actions by President Trump. So now in China, you see a resurgence of nationalism, saying that, well, we are proud to be Chinese, and then you see this being part of the outcome of to contest the US hegemony. So this is, I think, something positive that has come out of this global trade war and rivalries. Okay, so I think if we look at what China has to face, has to confront now, then we have to look at it, place it with in this historical trajectory of the first 30 years of building on its own the economic structure. And because of the isolation, it has also been a good impetus for China to be self-reliant, to rely on its own, and also to develop the industries, heavy industries, and then later on the light industries. And so and so it's not as if China was following Samya Min's theory of delinking as a voluntary and conscious strategy. It was forced on China when there's no neighbor to being there to help you, when you are being cordoned off by these two major camps in the world. What can you do? Of course, you can have the Bandung, you have the alignment with the developing countries. So then Africa, Asia, and Latin America in those times were brothers and sisters of China, because so there was the whole idea about the third world, that there was the third possibility, a third world where China could survive, well, building different alliances. So that was the 60s, 70s. And we can see that this strategy had been somehow put to secondary position when China started all this opening up. And of course, and there have been cooperation between China and the developing countries, but there was more for trade, for not the kind of solidarity that was being posed in the 60s and 70s. But then when China is now being well, threatened by the US, not only in terms of trade, in terms of technology, but also militarily. So we can see that the US planes had actually been going and then to Taiwan. And so it has been on the nerves of China in the last months. So could China be taking a more proactive role to try to line up again with its sisters and brothers from the developing world, and also putting not economic interest in the first place, but taking a political stand? That is, trying not only to think of how China can best benefit from the trade, from taking the resources from the developing countries and selling the goods, but or selling the technology, selling its railways, etc., but finding a way for a more equitable and also fair development. Fair path. So I think that is one possibility, and that is, I think, something that I feel that the social movements or the people's movements should be looking to. It's not, and so, Professor Sid just now gave you some of the figures about the pandemic, how China was dealing with the pandemic. And I think in that we also see China well, reverting, going against its own logic of capitalism, because in capitalism, the capital takes all the profit. Capital goes where there is profit, and but then during the pandemic, we could see that the government was mobilizing a lot of resources, and the resources included government funds and also, well, technology to build the hospitals. The 2 hospitals were built within 2 weeks, and also giving all this support, mobilizing all the medical personnel from public hospitals to go to Wuhan so as to contain the pandemic, and also mobilizing the existing social networks on the ground, such as in the villages, etc. So there were all these voluntary networks, people's networks that were mobilized in order to fight the pandemic. So in this, then we can see that, so somehow we could see the signs of solidarity, the talk, the cultural values of solidarity and well, public good being put on the agenda. Once again, during the pandemic. And the government was taking up its responsibility while mobilizing local communities to do their part. So, well, I have to add one more thing is that since, well, maybe the turn of the century, there has also been quite a drastic turn in China's policies on education, on health, because a lot of them are getting commodified. Well, education has been commodified. Healthcare has been commodified. So we see certain areas where they are profitable, and so they have we have seen this privatized healthcare systems. But then during the pandemic, these private hospitals, private medical personnel, they were not there to help with the pandemic. They were all these personnel from the public hospitals. And so now after the pandemic, there have been the discussions about whether health should be a public good, health shouldn't be privatized. But then of course, if China is, if the government is going to do something about it, then it will come into conflict with the established interests. And these established interests are very strong, and they have and are very rooted in certain places. So, but then still, from the way China has been handling the question of the pandemic, there is also hope for education and health, etc., being posed again as well, something that the government should take responsibility for and shouldn't go for privatization and for profit making. So on this then, I would like to maybe say something about the Ant group. I think people have been talking a lot, and Professor Sid had been giving you some of the figures about this, what's happened with this Ant group that was supposed to become the biggest IPO in the financial markets. Everybody, I mean, those with money and with a big interest, they were getting so excited about the listing of the Ant group, and then suddenly it was halted. And I think what is interesting is that on the one hand, it's not certain whether it could be approved again. It could be, it may not be, so we don't know yet. But then from this particular case, then we can see how certain interests have taken their share, and a very big lion's share in China's financialization. So there were a lot of figures that were given to you by Professor Sid, so I'm not going to repeat them, because just in the last 2 or 3 years, we saw a lot of the P2P platforms crashing in China. So a lot of people had been losing money, and so all these microcredit, etc., had gone bankrupt. But then how come we can have the Ant group that has come to gather so much financial muscle? So this now has posed a very interesting case for us to study. And I also feel that with this case, then people come to have to know more about what was going on. Because with the listing and with the IPO, then the companies will have to release information about who the shareholders are. And it's interesting to take a look at the list of shareholders, So that I will leave you to do, because within China, then you find that actually the pension fund and some banks and some main government securities, etc., they are all part of the Ant group as stockholding partners. So it's not as if the government is now investigating into and maybe recharting the path for a private enterprise. This private enterprise, well, mainly private, has gathered all these finances, but then also working together with some major government partners. So that's one point. And the second point is, who are the foreign investors? Who are the foreign partners in this end group adventure? But then maybe I'll just give you one figure. China's population is 1.4 billion. But then for the end group, then the individual members with the subscribing to the end group is 1 billion. That means it's about 80% if the accounts, if the private accounts, the personal individual accounts is held maybe one person may hold 2 or 3 accounts that you don't know. But still, having 1 billion individual accounts out of a population of 1.4 billion, then you see the scale. And it also has 80 million commercial companies being part of among being its users. So there we talked about the usury because they use a lot of methods to tell you to borrow money, to go into debt. And so the average debt, they said, would be 2,000 renminbi. 2,000 renminbi may not sound very much, but then if you think of the large number of the users who would be paying 15% of annual interest rate, then you can understand why the end group with Jack Ma there could be amassing such a lot of wealth within such a short time. So I read some of the discussions in the Western media, and then I saw that people were saying that now you have this modest, poor teacher with his background. Now he's from his wisdom and from his skills, then he could be building this financial empire. And now he has come into confrontation with the party, with the Communist Party, with the government. So, so this is being posed. But the story is being told in this way, but I feel that we can take a different look from this particular example. We can see how Jack Ma used the loopholes when it didn't go under the monitoring of the banks, because technically it is not a bank. So it doesn't go under the monitoring by the bank. And then because in China, you do not have the credit cards. So it served somehow as a kind of credit card for the people and then for the users. And so once people would use their credit card and then they would go into the debt, etc., etc. Okay, so this would be a very interesting case to follow through. And also from this, then we may get more information being revealed as to the kind of networks, the kind of collusions between the new financial tycoons within China and also linking up with those abroad. So I'll be very quick. I'll just have another 5 minutes, and then I hope we can go into the discussions. So, I feel that there's one dimension when we talk about the challenges for China is the question of climate change, the question of food sovereignty, and the question of water. Although these issues are being somehow shadowed because of the pandemic, and because under the pandemic, people talk about how to fight the pandemic, but at the same time, people talk about, economic regeneration, as if economic growth has always been the ideal for everybody. So now it seems that we are being posed between the dichotomy between, well, the economic growth or the lockdown in order to safeguard our health. So, but then at the same time, a lot of other issues which are as prominent may be sidelined. But I would like to draw attention to the question of climate change, because China is very vulnerable. It has only about, I think, 7% of the world freshwater resources, while it has the world's about 18 or 19% of population. So it has only, it is the per capita access to fresh water in China is below the world average. And so now with the climate change, with the ice, with the snow melting from the Tibetan plateaus, etc., then this would pose a very, very big threat to China. So I think that is one thing. And then the other question is about food security. So, but I'm not going into details, because actually I had edited this book on the struggle for food sovereignty, and which was, okay, I had edited this book. So maybe later you can just go into some of the details, but I would like to just well, quickly mention this one. So I feel that what China should be going to as and or actually then I think one is we need to look at all these contending forces within China. There are a lot of contradictions, a lot of tensions. And so I think within the party, within the ruling regime, among the intelligentsia, among the professionals, there have been a lot of struggles. Whether these struggles are visible or not, then sometimes, well, we being outside of some of these power circles, we do not know. But still, we can see that the situation is not all optimistic for China, given the trade, etc. But there's a possibility of China going into alliance, as I said just now, going into more solidarity with the developing countries. And so I think China has also, the Chinese government has also announced that once it has the vaccine for the COVID-19, it will share with the developing countries. And China is the only country with the vaccine producing capacity that has joined the COVAX. All US, Europe, etc., they didn't join. So, but then the COVAX covers 60% of the global population. So I feel that if China could be pushed to go further on that road of solidarity instead of economic, trade and so-called cooperation, which is basically driven by capital profiteering on the resources, etc., then there would be well, something that could be welcomed for both people of China and also the global, the people from the developing countries. I think, well, the last point is, well, when we talk about these challenges, we have to see, mention a little bit about the cultural changes, the shifts in perception of the US, perception of China itself. But I feel that China has actually gone quite radically along the path of, well, the market and marketization and financialization. And it will take a huge effort to correct that path so that it can go onto the one as proposed by Samya Min, the kind of delinking from the global, from the domination or the definition of the development agenda by the major powers. And so, but then that will be, but then that is not impossible, especially given that we are now in this crisis. And within the crisis, then what seemed impossible previously could now appear to be possible. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim Chi. Thanks a lot. Now I invite Professor Bruno to his comments, and after him we will open the debate. I have already some questions here posed by our audience in YouTube, and after Professor Bruno, I will read them, and we will have another moment to think about them with our audience.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening to my Chinese colleagues. Thanks, Victor, for chairing this session. A special thanks to Professor Paulo Nakatani for inviting me to be here. And it's really an honor for me to comment this session. And I'd like to start by saying that I'm very, very impressed by both talks. They were really brilliant and really comprehensive. Thanks, Professor Lau. Thanks, Professor Sit, for this really brilliant presentation. And I feel that because, first of all, you did not avoid the sensible topics. When we talk about China, obviously, its development path is astonishing. It's not by chance that many persons in the whole world are studying it, but obviously it creates a lot of challenges. And you've been talking about really the most important ones, not avoiding the sensible discussions, and in a way that we, the Western scholars, cannot talk. I just made a list here, and I'll read it because it's really a comprehensive list. You've been talking about tradition against modernity, which is something which many countries in their development paths they face. Inequalities, both social inequalities and regional inequalities. The disputes in the international arena, mostly against the US, but not only. The financial problems related to credit, over-indebtedness, but also to the real estate, the stock markets, and so on. The idle capacity, a problem that has been increased by the international crisis, the global crisis, whose outbreak was in 2007, 8, 9. You've been talking about rural against urban, so rural-urban question, which is also another very important and sensible topic. You've been talking about ecological problems, environment, climate change, and so on, food sovereignty. So it's really a comprehensive list, and in 1 hour and a half, you've been able to talk about all of that. And as I mentioned, you did it obviously in a much better way than we Western scholars are able to do. We have a problem also in the studies about China in the whole world, in my opinion, is that sometimes we get involved with discussion only with US scholars, European scholars, to discuss China. And it's obviously a very big mistake. We have to listen to the Chinese scholars, to the Chinese population, but to the Chinese scholars. And then again, congratulations to the organizers of this event, to Paulo Nakatani, for organizing this roundtable, because I guess this is the way for us to understand China, to discuss it with Chinese scholars. So thank you very much. Well, I don't want to monopolize the questions and the comments, so I tried to organize my comments in 3 blocks, and then I'll have at the end 1 minor question related to Brazil, and then we can go to the responses and to the public questions, and then if I have time, I can raise some other questions, but I'll try to concentrate myself initially in some topics. First of all, first block. Professor Sit mentioned it, very interesting, that the Chinese political and economic elites feel compelled now to expand their activities in the world. I don't know if the whole sentence was like this, but they feel compelled, I remember, and this is important for my question, it was precisely this expression that was used by Professor Sit. And then my question is, what are the reasons for this compulsion? And I'll explain why I'm raising this question and why I think this question is important. We have a lot of discussions regarding tendency of the Chinese culture to be self-contained. So at least here in the Western universities, there are some discussions related to the possibility that China had in the past to go to the whole world, because the navigation technology in China was much more developed than in Europe or in other parts of the world. But then in a given moment, the emperor asked the boats to be burned and so on. So trying to show that, well, the Chinese culture is more about self-containing, defending its own territory than going abroad. But now we see, and I totally agree with you, this compulsion of going abroad. And then my question is, what creates this necessity? Does it come from the inherent necessity of capital for extroversion? So this is the question. Professor Lau mentioned it, and here I also use her expression, that China has its own logic of capitalism. So in this new logic, is it possible to curb this inherent necessity of capital for extroversion? So this is the first question. And then related to that, many Western scholars, without making the mediation, they make a kind of accusation of China to be imperialist. So in Chinese imperialism in Africa, in Latin America, and so on. So if you want to respond also to this claim that is made by many Western scholars, I would be happy. So this is the first block of questions. This compulsion for going abroad. And second block of questions, or second topic with some related questions, financial globalization. I really enjoyed the way both presenters used the Samir Amin's proposal about delinking. It's really interesting. And China has benefited from this delinking process for some decades, which much challenges, obviously, but with some benefits as well. And when we come to precisely to the financial arena, this not being totally linked to the financial movements brings benefits. Stability, or at least less instability, which is also inherent to capitalism, more autonomy to decide monetary policy, economic policy as a whole, and so on. But as Professor Sit mentioned, there has been a pressure for China to open the financial account, a pressure which comes from the multilateral institution, IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and so on. But also, internally, I think, and this is already one of the questions, there is a pressure also for this opening the process of the financial account in China. And this is related not only, but importantly related to one objective, which is the internationalization of the Chinese currency, the Chinese renminbi. When we see the process of internationalization of the other currencies, we see that they were related, obviously, to this process of opening up their financial accounts. And then the classical understanding of this movement is that, well, China will have to go deeper in the opening up process of the financial account if it wants to have a really international currency, the renminbi as a really international currency. And you mentioned the dominance of the dollar. You didn't use this expression, but the exorbitant privilege, which is an expression used to talk about the privilege the US has by issuing the key currency of the world. It has a lot of benefits. For instance, it has no limits for their current account deficits. It has much less limits for the autonomy of the economic policy, fiscal policy, and so on. And besides everything, money is power. Money is power. So in this dispute, obviously, money is also in the core of the international disputes with the US. Well, having said all of that, my question is precisely about this opening up process of the financial account. I also heard that internally there has been some discussions between, for instance, the People's Bank of China, which wants to open more and go deeper in the opening up process of the financial account, and the Minister of Commerce does not want it. Why? Because precisely having this kind of de-link or having filters for the financial capitals is important for the development strategy of China. Avoiding the instability, giving more possibilities to control the exchange rate, and so on. So my question is, how do you see all this trade-off of a really clear will and effort of the Chinese government to internationalize the renminbi, to make the renminbi a global currency, but the problems related to this linking process with the financial globalization. Related to that, you mentioned also the 2015 crash. So the crisis, the financial crisis in China in 2015. But then it's a minor question, but I just want you to comment on some issues. It was indeed a financial crisis, I totally agree, but I have the impression that the Western media and the Western scholars have overestimated this crisis. Why? Because when we see, for instance, this loss of $1 trillion in the international reserves, the Chinese international reserves, we see it was counterbalanced by the acquisition of other international assets by China. So China is making, and you know it better than me, direct investments all over the world. And when you go into the net position of China, we see that this loss of international reserves was more than counterbalanced by other international assets. So money going to the multilateral banks, money being invested all around the world. So my question is if this cannot be seen also as, it was for sure a way, some of the international reserves had to be used in order to control the exchange rate in order to avoid a huge devaluation. But a part of this loss, if this cannot be seen just as a diversification of the international assets, which is something common to countries when they go into a more mature moment in their development path. Then third block of comments and questions. I really enjoyed the way Professor Sit finished her presentation by saying that, well, in spite of all challenges that China has nowadays, COVID-19 has brought some opportunities as well. And this can be related, according to what I understood, to this grassroots mobilization in China. So which can be related and should be related to the development of the rural areas, the rural communities, and so on. So it may be seen as a way of coming back to the origin of even Chinese Revolution, which is this close relation to the bottom. I mean, to the bottom, and the development of the whole country in the really small rural communities. And then one thing that I would ask in this topic is, how would you put in your analysis, because I I think that it was implicit in your talk, but if I'm not wrong, you did not explicitly mention this topic. So how would you include in the analysis the question of the internal migrant workers? Because if I understand it correctly, this would be a way of avoiding these workers of going from the rural area to the urban cities where they have really, I wouldn't say bad, but worse life conditions than those who are there officially there in the urban areas. So how would you include these migrant workers in the analysis? And then another question, if this interruption of flows of workers from the rural area to the cities wouldn't create economic problems for China, especially a lack of workforce in the big cities, but also a lack of demand for some areas related to the civil construction, because one of the problems, and you mentioned that, is the idle capacity. One of the best examples is the idle capacity in steel. And then the urbanization process, which is thought to be the most rapid urbanization process in the history of humanity, is an important part of the let's say, it's an important economic vector for China's economy. So is it possible to just bring this vector to the development of infrastructure in the rural areas, or it would create problems of lack of demand for these areas? And then the question of the workforce, possibility or not of a lack of workforce in the cities. Here I finish my third block, and then I come to my very minor question, but it is important for Brazil. China-Brazil, and more specifically Bolsonaro, because all of us, we are aware about these, you talk a lot of Trump, and Bolsonaro tries to be the tropical Trump. He tries to follow Trump's steps, or try it at least. Also in making some offensive comments, not only him, but his ministers and his son, and so on, against China. Obviously, related to that, he tries to have a pragmatic policy because he knows Brazil is totally dependent on China. But I have the feeling that the Chinese government is obviously cautious about Bolsonaro, because it's not the moment to break the bridges, to burn the bridges, obviously, between the two countries. Both countries have benefit in this interaction, but the Chinese government knows that Bolsonaro is not a person to rely on. So how do you see these tensions between between China and the Brazilian government? I finish here by thanking again the brilliant presentations. I was really, really impressed. I'm really frank by saying that. I learned a lot, and later on, if I have time, I can come to some other questions, but those were my major comments and questions. Thank you very much, Vitor.
Thanks a lot, Professor Bruno. We will begin to present the questions, but before that, do you hear me? Yes? Okay, but before that, I would like again to thank a lot our three invitees, really Professor Qingqi and Professor Sitsui showed us two brilliant expositions, and it reinforces between us the feeling that our partnership between Universidade Federal do Espírito Santo and Lingnan University is very dear to us, is very important to us, and we hope to continue it, to profound it, and to deepen this exchange with which we learn a lot. We learn a lot for already some years. Our public is a bit shy, I think, because this conference is in English, and we received only one question from YouTube. But I will turn this problem into an opportunity, and I will also put a question, my question. Okay. So I will put a question, and I will present you a question which we received from YouTube. The question from YouTube, from the public, is if Professor Qin and Professor Sitsu, if they think that the necessity of retaking traditional medicine in China may point to the limits of modern medicine, but even more, if this retake may point to limits of the pharmaceutical industrial complex, and if they see it as an opportunity to build an alternative, a Chinese alternative to this mode of production, capitalist mode of production applied to medicine, to the medical area. So this is the first question. And she asks also, Mercedes Giuliani, it's the same person. She asks also if the production of phytotherapics in China is industrial and if it is private or not. Okay, if it is made by private enterprises or by the state. So it is the first big question. The second question is a question of mine. It's a question that in some ways it seeks the same path as Professor Bruno, but with a somewhat political bias that is a bit different. So I will ask you, as you spoke, as you presented, as you spoke, I remembered from a book, I remembered of a book which was released last year by Professors Jiming Long and Remy Herrera, a book called Is China Capitalist? It was released 2019. It was released last year. And in this book, the authors argue that nowadays the project ruling Chinese development is part of an important dispute at this very moment. So they show us that there is a huge dispute within China around the project of development, Chinese development. What seemed to me the capital point in your exposition is the suggestion that in a contradictory situation as that of China, a country which is publicly engaged in a socialist transition project, the mere project of developing a huge economy to surmount the USA and the main centers of capitalism is not the only possible path, and even possibly is not the best development project. That means that the mere development without the adequate qualification may conduct China to a dead end, not only economically, but also socially and ecologically, to a point where it may just become one more piece in the capitalist world table, which seems, this capitalist world seems to face profound and deepening contradictions, probably insoluble within the system's own framework. So I would be very grateful if you three could develop this point, explaining us, if it's possible, if we have time, or if we don't have time, another day we discuss that, but if you could explain us the key political and economical questions related to building a deepening of the socialist project in China instead of the capitalist development, and the economical and political possibilities of spreading this project to other parts of the world as a possibility, a global possibility to surmount capitalism, and not to reinforce it. So I invite you to answer the complex questions we presented you, and I invite you to speak. You may decide what is the best order, if Professor Lau Qingqi or Professor Sitsu or Professor Bruno, who will speak first. I let you decide this. Thank you.
I suggest maybe Qingqi speak first, because she will leave early 15 earlier. Yeah, so I will stay behind anyway. Yeah, so Qingqi, please.
Okay, I was about to suggest that the Professor speak first, but anyway, okay. So, well, thank you for the questions about China. And actually, many years ago, I edited a book called The China Reflected. I'll also show you also here. And well, for this book, it was edited 20 years ago, but the whole book is is available on the Global University website, so you can download it. And in that, in my opening, in the preface, I said that China is so huge, so complex, that nobody can claim to have well, to understand it in its entirety. But then at the same time, there is this, and so there are truths and untruths when one say that China has a long tradition. It is true and untrue at the same time. Because, for example, if I take the example of the traditional medicine, actually, Professor Sid and I, we just wrote an article for the journal Development on the question of the traditional Chinese medicine, and it's coming out, I think, in 1 or 2 weeks. So we will be sharing that with you. It is in English. Well, if we look at traditional Chinese medicine, it dates back to about 8,000 years of practice. And then there have been hundreds of important works written. There was the ones to talk about the whole body, to talk about all the herbs that you can find. And actually these books, these classics, have also been translated into English. And yet in China, if we look at the path that it has taken, it is there more as something that we would go for. For example, this time to prevent the pandemic, we would just go to take some Chinese herbal soup. We know which 5 or 6 herbs we can cook together, boil together, and then we can take the soup. So this is very common practice when we have flu, when we have, I mean, especially minor problems, then we just take care of ourselves, and we do not need to go for the antibiotics or etc. But then at the same time, institutionally, because of this, because China was invaded by the 8 powers in 1900, when you heard that the palace was being burned and being looted, and you can find a lot of those things now in the British Museum, etc. So then this pride that we have in our own traditions was very much shattered. And so on the one hand, if you look at all the kind of Enlightenment intellectuals in China at the turn of the century, of the 20th century, before 100 years ago, then you see this preference for the more advanced one. So because the imperialist forces, they have these cannons, they have all these powers, and so almost automatically they must be superior also in other things. And so there is on the one hand this self-doubt, about our own traditions. And at the same time, then if we look at the history of the demise of the traditional Chinese medicine, we see that in the 1920s already, the Rockefeller Foundation came to China, sold all this kerosene and gas and all this, and became was monopolizing a lot of these areas. It was 100 years ago. The Rockefeller Foundation came, and then they supported the people that were pro-Western medicine. And so the government at that time, the nationalist government at that time, they just did away with Chinese medicine and then put in place Western medicine. And so, somehow, if we look at the proportion, you have about 10% of the funds, medical personnel, etc., between 10 to 20% being for traditional Chinese medicine nowadays, and 80% is the Western medicine. So you see this huge imbalance, which is institutional and also cultural, because people will see this preference. So we talked a lot about that in the article that we wrote. But then this applies not only, I think, not only to traditional Chinese medicine, it also applies to all traditional medicines, whether that is in Guam, in Kenya, in Mexico. I think it is the same thing, that we have been brought under the hegemony of the US FDA, which is the main institution to validate. And then when they specify that they need to be, that everything has to be so-called scientifically tested, it means their understanding of science, their scientific criteria, without acknowledging that it is that the traditional medicines have another logic about the way humans are situated in the cosmos, in the environment, and also this. And so if we look at the indigenous approaches to medicine, to health, to the body, and to human existence, then we see a lot of similarities between Chinese and Indians and Africans. And so, but then at the same time, all these are being battered by the hegemony of the Western medicine, which of course is a very lucrative business with all the pharmaceutical businesses. So that is my reaction about the question of tradition. So in the same vein, about education, so we will feel, well, then there is this modernization problem. So I feel that it's not only talking about whether it is capitalist or socialist. We have to look at the whole pursuit of modernization under this so-called globalization. But of course, we know that globalization didn't start recently. It's a word to camouflage the imperialist and colonialist plunders. And so, of course, globalization started when they were trading all the slaves, when they were taking all the resources from Latin America to Europe, when they were taking all the spices from Asia, the pepper and all these, and the silk to Europe. So I feel that in a way, when we look at things, we need to have this perspective of at least 500 years, if not at least 200 years, to see these international and global exchanges. So then when we talk about China, then it is very, because on the one hand, a lot of focus is on what the government is doing, the government policies, government rhetoric. And so we only see usually, it's not only from the Western mainstream media, it's also even from Chinese mainstream media. We tend to look at it from the elite's point of view. Those who write, those who do research, like professors in the universities like us, then we are very often voluntarily or involuntarily, consciously or unconsciously, playing the game of the kind of knowledge production. The kind of knowledge production that would privilege certain knowledges against other knowledges. So in that sense, that is also why we have been stressing the question of the subaltern knowledges, taking subaltern or the grassroots perspectives in our understanding of the histories. So I'm very glad that you mentioned the question, for example, Professor De Conti mentioned the question about the migrant workers. It is important to look at China's development in the last 40 years, not because of some benevolent policies of the government or some wise leadership, but because of all these sacrifices by the migrant laborers. Well, it's a whole topic to go into why people from the rural are being compelled or encouraged to go to the cities, because, and that has to do with the rural-urban division, because you can, if you work as a migrant worker, even if you get very little pay in the cities, you work in Foxconn to produce all the iPhones, etc. You work like being under serious, under very strict discipline, because if you imagine a factory where it is 100,000 workers working in that factory, how to queue up to go into the factory, the time it takes to go to the toilet, at the time and then when you come out, they search you because you are always suspected of stealing, etc. You can imagine the kind of a situation of a worker working in these Foxconn factories, whether it is in China, in Malaysia, or in Mexico, or anywhere. It is similar. But then why should the migrant workers still opt to work in these what we call very alienating conditions in the cities? Because what they can earn in 2 weeks in the city as a very low paid migrant worker would already be equivalent to what they could get from farming for a whole year. And so if we look at it, then the reason why China can produce all these very cheap manufactured goods, which in a way is being so-called dumped onto the world, but on the other hand, it helps to lift the living standards for a lot of poorer sections around the whole world. But then this has been the sacrifice of the cheap labor in this, and also because the government or the local governments, in order to attract foreign investments, then actually almost provide the land almost for free, provide the infrastructures, and also we're using all the production capacities from before the reform era. So there were all these factories already there, all these car producing lines that were later being bought up by Fiat, by Italy or Germany or Sweden, etc. So if we look at the so-called miracle of China, we have to place it in the, to look at the particular details. The particular details, the specific details happening in the local context. How come we can produce such a cheap light bulb, such cheap stationery, etc., when you find that the raw materials would already be would cost more than the final product. So there has been a lot of these things, but then in a way, I think the government has been very concerned with the question of unemployment. And so this is not only an economic choice, it's also a political choice. In order to gain security and maybe social order, in order that people get jobs, then the government would try to make concessions in various places. So for example, it's no longer profitable to be producing manufactured goods. And so these manufacturers, they are all already producing at a loss. So how was China encouraging the export? It gives 15% of subsidy to the factories. So for a factory owner, when you run the factory, you think that, well, maybe my rate of profit would be maybe 5%. But then if the government is already giving you 15%, you can afford to be losing a little bit, even if you employ workers, etc. So if we look at China's strategies, it's not only economic, it's also political. There's also the concern for social order, social stability, and this whole question about providing enough jobs, not only to the larger population, but just even the millions of university graduates every year. So that is a huge thing. So I think when we try to understand what China is doing, whether it is on so we have to try to understand the context. If there were not this rural-urban divide, if the rural had not been sacrificing so much of its values produced through the labor values for China's industrialization, then it couldn't be, China couldn't have taken off. So that is also why Professor Sid and I and Professor Wen Te-Jin and others, we have been involved in this rural reconstruction movement for over 20 years. We have always been stressing that if we look at the people who had been sacrificed or who had contributed a lot to so-called China's modernity, to China's so-called miracle, then we have to see that these people, this large section of people, also should be rewarded for their labor, for their contribution. And it is also, fortunately, because of the blockade, because of the global economic downturn, etc., that China has this excess capital. So China has this excess in capital, in production capacity, and in labor. So how to deal with all this excess? So maybe the Belt and Road Initiative, but then we all know that the Belt and Road will have to go by very unstable countries, for example, Afghanistan or Pakistan or something. So in order to reach Europe, and so it's quite an impossible project in itself. So China actually has been reinvesting into the countryside. So you heard all these trillions of renminbi, etc., billions of renminbi, etc., that China has been putting to develop the West, for infrastructure, building all the roads for all the villages, etc. All this money that has been invested into the countryside in the last 10 years is not necessarily because China is trying to fill up the gaps between the rich and poor, of the inequalities, but also because of this excess. When you have all this excess capital, production capacity, and labor, what do you do? So you try to build more highways, you try to build more railroads, etc., etc. So, so then what I'm trying to stress is that it's not just the economic logic. There's also the political concerns, etc., that China has to take into account. About the financial globalization, I think Professor Si can talk a little bit more about the opening of the financial accounts. This is something that we are very worried about because that clause was being put into the WTO clause. And China should be starting to meet its obligations starting from April this year. And which was also why we find that Morgan Stanley, etc., all these financial companies, they had already come into China long ago, but then previously the rule was that they couldn't go beyond 50% of ownership. But in April, it's opened up, so then they could have 100% ownership. But of course, before they could always have his own agents in China, etc., to help it to cover up and all this. So, but I think that there's one question we need to really go into, and actually we have been for the Global University, we have been having this series of lectures delivered by Professor Michael Hudson, whom I think most of you know, who has written Super Imperialism, J for Junk Economics, Killing the Host, and Forgive Them the Debts, etc. He's written about 10 books. But then we have asked him to deliver a series of 10 lectures on all these topics, which would cover all the 10 books, the main points of the 10 books that he had written. And we are editing them, and then I think maybe in 2 or 3 months, we will be able to release them to the public. And his focus is on the question of debt. We all know that Professor Hudson, actually he has gone into the whole history of debt, going into Mesopotamia, going into the Greek and Roman times, looking at the questions about Jubilee. And I think, and actually I have to leave a bit earlier today because I need to be hosting the lecture series at 10 o'clock, our time 10 o'clock for Professor Hudson's lecture. So I think the question of debt need to be focused on because, well, for example, I come back to the Ant Group. The reason why the Ant Group has been so successful, the Alibaba has been so successful, so-called successful in the last few years, is because it has been able to get people to go into debt, to borrow money from it, and with the money that it gets from from this, then it lends out again. And so actually this is gains market value is 100 times is net profit. But then it has been able to do that, taking advantage of the loophole, because it calls itself not a finance institution. It calls itself a digital science and technology institution. And so it avoided, maybe with a lot of help from his friends, powerful friends in the important sectors, it avoided all this government monitoring and control and regulation over banks. But then it has been lending money more than banks. And so if you ask people, I was trying to ask my students the other day, how many of you have borrowed money from Ant Group? And it's over half of them. Maybe it could be 1,000, well, it would be 100 US dollars, which may not sound too much, but then, well, it's very easy. You can just borrow. Then so people then got into playing this game. Whereas if you do not have a credit card, you do not have all this mentality to spend before you have the money. So now you spend the money and you feel that, okay, 2 months later, I can repay it. But you spend and you overspend. And so I think at the center of all these questions about finance, etc., we need to look at the whole question of debt, and we are also learning about what's happening. The same way you are trying to see what's happening. So with China, with the Ant Group, so these days we are collecting a lot of materials in Chinese, especially because some people, there's one article where the person listed about 50 names of important people who have been running all these financial institutions in China, and showing all the links among them, who is whose wife, who is also who has the stocks in this Ant Group. While he's being a so-called independent director, he actually has his wife holding a company, holding stocks of the ant group and all these things. There's a lot of interesting things going on, and especially with the internet in China. Although people think that China, then there is the misconception that China is all under bound, well, surrounded by an iron wall, and the people didn't have freedom of speech, and then all people were being being submissive and servile, etc. That's actually not true. I think the central government is more worried about all this anarchy and all these explosions of true and fake news around, and so we are all so we get actually a lot of interesting information and very good information also on all these networks of the financial tycoons. But I feel that this ant group incident, many people said that this must be from the this halting of the IPO must be from the president himself, because no other person could have this this power to do that. But then at the same time, I feel that if we look at the ruling regime, then it is concerned, of course, on the one hand, on having a booming economy, having people being relatively happy and content and not to make trouble. And also within any government in the world, then you have the representatives of those interest blocks. And so how the situation is within China, then it's really difficult to say. That, of course, there are all these interest blocks having the representatives. And somehow the question is also that if we look at all these ministers, especially the financial ministers, we have to see where they got educated and how far they have been influenced by the Chicago boys, how far they themselves truly and genuinely believe in the free market, in so-called fair trade, etc., forgetting about the specificities of Chinese histories of subordination and plunder. So, and then one last question I will talk about, and then I will hand over to Professor Sid, is that, well, there are, for China, then of course, the money games are played out in much the same way as the logic of capital. But then, if we look at China, then you see that some of the main institutions, for example, the several major banks, they are all state-owned. Being state-owned, then sometimes they have to follow the political directives and not only their own economic drive. So, for example, all these banks, they didn't want to lend to the farmers, to the peasants, because the peasants, they didn't have anything to mortgage. Maybe the piece of land couldn't be mortgaged. They didn't have anything of value. So, and then it's more high risk. So then the banks didn't want to lend to them. And then there was a directive from the higher ups to say that the agricultural bank, if your name is agricultural bank, you will have to lend to the rural population. So things like that, then so occasionally you see directives from the government, which would be, of course, most certainly political concerns. And also, so for example, well, we gave the example of the pandemic, that the government was putting in all this money, all these resources to contain the pandemic. The reason why it has to do this, because it has to be concerned with keeping generally good health for its population. Otherwise, when there's the outbreaks, then it would go out of control, and so we see the government really throwing a lot of money into containing the pandemic. And of course, in China, we also have had this SARS in 2003. So in Hong Kong or anywhere in the mainland, as soon as there's flu or as soon as there's anything, we put on a mask. And so in Hong Kong, if you do not wear a mask, you cannot go into the train, you cannot go onto a bus, you are not allowed into the university campus. You would be really discriminated against. But then I think in Canada, I have some friends there. They say that if you wear a mask, it's a problem. You may be beaten up if you wear a mask. Okay, then about China's relationship with Brazil, how China looks at Bolsonaro, etc. Then I'll leave all these to Professor Sid. So maybe I would like to also take this opportunity to thank you, to thank our moderator, Professor Victor Neves, and also our commentator, Professor Bruno de Conti, and all those who have come in to join this seminar, because we feel that it is very important that we strengthen our collaboration. And that is why we also have this collaboration with UFES. We also feel that we are very blessed because in Brazil, there is so much that we can learn from. The long traditions, the hard struggles fought by the MST, the struggles you are now waging against the rightist governments, the fascists, etc. And all these are the very invaluable experiences that we learn from. And actually, Professor Sid is our ambassador, the people's ambassador to Brazil, and so she would be also. She's also trying to convey to us in seminars what's happening in Brazil and telling us stories about Brazil, about your struggles, and so we hope that this people-to-people solidarity could continue, and then it is important that we share with each other not only our values and our experiences, but also we produce knowledge together, knowledge that could counter the Eurocentrism, the Anthropocene kind of things. And then there are so many other themes that we could and also should be working together on food sovereignty, on climate change, on rebuilding communities, and on community regeneration. So I thank you again for inviting us to the seminar. The seminar is not ending. It will continue for another 20 minutes with Professor Sid Choi. So thank you again. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Kim Chi. I will invite Professor Sid Tsui to also answer the questions. And I have good news before. We received a new question from Professor Maria Lucia Garcia, our professor. Sid Tsui knows her. She demanded if you could talk a bit. I think Professor Kim Chi has already done it, but she demands if you could talk a bit about how important our partnership is for you, and how important it is also for you to be here and to study our experience and our activities to your knowledge. So thank you, Professor Sid Tsui. The word is with you. I have just to warn that 11 o'clock, this room will be closed because there is another activity after. So I would ask you very, very politely if you could finish at 10:55, so we can say goodbye to everyone and finish. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much of all your questions. I already enjoy this kind of dialogues, and I make some quick response about the Chinese elites, right? And when we're looking back to Chinese, the history of New China, the first 30 years, actually, we tried to pursue so-called the Soviet dream. And then the next 30 or 40 years, we pursue the US dream. So quite a lot of generation, the particularly young generation, including those nowadays high rank officer or intellectuals generation, they all went to the United States to have further studies. So that's Kinchi point out the Chicago boys, right? We have also a lot of amount of Chinese Chicago boys. So they believe in neoliberalism, they believe in free markets, they believe in the privatization. So they believe in money is God. So this is not different from other, particularly not different from the Chile and also the Latin America during the 1970s. So, and that's why this group of neoliberal economists, they believe in internationalization of renminbi. That means the ultimate dream is to replace US dollar with renminbi. This is a kind of dominant mentality. So, but I would rather say we tried that means you develop a kind of people's perspective. We try to not only to delink from the US dollar hegemony, but also how to make currency become a media or not a speculative tools. This is, I think, this is the people's perspective of developing a kind of really people's currency. That means you make your currency serve the real economy, the productive economy, but not to use a currency as a kind of exploitative power or exploitative tool, not only towards your peasant and workers or the peasant and workers in the other world or in the rest of the world. So this is my point. And you know that the China, Japan, and South Korea is a big, the biggest or the largest US dollar link. So in the short term, how this new agreement, the RCEP, has a kind of opportunity, I would say alternative, not yet, right? But maybe they will try to develop not only a free or trade agreement, but at the same time to think about how can maybe they will provide the space to develop a kind of new currency, a different clearing or a different calculative bank system. Of course, the One Belt, One Road has already have a new bank, but yet the calculating system is still based on the US dollar. So I think one of the challenges question is to how to delink from the US dollar and how to, to pack the question of packaging, packing, PEGGING, because even renminbi also pegged to US dollar, HEA also pegged to US dollar. But how can we develop a kind of a mutual or bilateral agreement of the currency? So now they have to some kinds of the experiment, but the the calculating unit is still the US dollar. So how can we? This is our global south. The one of the biggest challenges of global south. If we want to develop a kind of people's agenda, we have to think about the link from US dollar and develop a kind of people's currency that is serve the people's agenda. So I think we have to develop this, explore the opportunities of the alternative currency. Yeah, not only the so-called at the community level. I mean, for example, it's also related to the Brazil-China relations, because no matter the rights and the leftists, the government, they all pro the agribusiness, right? They also sign a lot of the agribusiness, and then it's not, this is really bad for the indigenous community, really is bad for the small peasant in Brazil, and also it's not good for the Chinese consumer, because it's a GMO soybean, and also it destroyed the Amazon and also destroy our soybean peasants. So how can we develop the people's position? That means how can we strengthen our small peasants in Brazil and also in China? How to we emphasize to grow our own food, and then we can do some kind of exchange based on the surplus, but not make your whole land, the whole country, just work for the overseas market. I think we have to change this kind of mentality, no matter who is in government, right? So this is, I think, one of the challenges for both of us is how can we to challenge the agribusiness and agribusiness company. And I also learned from the Brazilian research team, because we have the so-called we have the emerging countries research project, including Brazil, from professor under the supervision of Professor Paulo Nactani. And then we understand the one of the roots of the Brazilian property is the land concentration, and then it's all work for the overseas market. So this is, and we also find that we under this the whole world food system, we also suffer from this kind of the food system, the under control of agribusiness. So it's really very important for the intellectuals from Brazil and China to push or to promote a people's agenda for the food system, for a food system that is bring benefits to peasant, small peasants in Brazil and also in China. And when you and another question about the 2015 and 2016 about the stock market crash, and the government, Chinese government, at last they sent police to make an investigation and to stop it, and then put those so-called the speculator in jail. But when compared with what happened, Chinese government deal with the first crisis, I mean during the 1949 to 1952, at that time, we also have this kind of the speculation problem. At that time, the Chinese government, send the army immediately close the stock market. So when we compare these two methods, what happened in 2015 actually is not radical enough. And then that means it also lets the financial, the activities continue. Let's the trend of financialization continues. And yet it also has some trend to divert or to channel this surplus capital into real economy. So at this moment, this is really a real struggle between the industrial capital and financial capital. Yeah, that is two mentality, two main mentality. One is for financialization, for the internationalization of renminbi, and the other is for the One Belt One Road, because we continues this kind of industrialization. So this is two main mentality in the intellectual debate or in the intellectual argument. So yet we also want to, if we still take a perspective from people from the global south, the people of the global south, we have to make alternative of these two, the mentality, that means for continuous industrialization and also the financialization, because both of them is all for the capital. So, and we also quite alert because in China, particularly, we have learned what happened in 1989 because the collapse of Soviet Union. So this is a debate or argument whether China will be the second of the Soviet Union. Even we don't have, if even there's no hot war, but if you this is the financialization, you can't imagine all China were under control of the Wall Street, right? And under the U.S. Army, under the U.S. Wall Street. So this is really a real debate, to particularly not only for the Chinese Communist Party, but also for the ordinary people. What happened during that the collapse of Soviet Union, and then the depreciation of the rubles is a one US dollar. You can have what 4,000 to 6,000 rubles, and then before that is 2 rubles, 1 US dollar. So you find that they just print a US dollar and then you grabbed all your the national welfare. It's very terrible. So to be honest, China is is a socialist country, but the idea of communism is not only the Chinese community adopt. Before that, we have a long history, and then our ancestor already has the concept of Da Tong. Da Tong, that means you have to take the lower class or the handicapped, the vulnerable, the weak, the sick, the widow into serious account. So even you don't name it as socialism or communism, but at least you have to bear in mind, how can you take the most vulnerable people into serious consideration? That's the socialism. And in the fights against the pandemic, this is really a new educational projects for the young people, for the whole generation, because people, is over profit. That means money is not power, people is power. And then we try to, we influence this kind of educational project. And for Lucia's question, yes, I definitely believe that our exchange can bring benefit to not only to UFIS, but also to my university and also Lingnan University. And we now have the share the research products. For example, I write a research paper with Hanada about how the grassroots women get involved in the rural regeneration movement, because we both are the intellectual and scholar and also activists. And then we both involved in the Hanada involved in the MST, and I all involved in the rural reconstruction movement. And then we also how to write the research paper to exchange our experience. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sitsui. On behalf of the organizing committee of the 8th International Social Policy Meeting, I would like once again to thank Professor Sitsui and Lao Qingqi from China, from Global University, from Lingnan University, and Professor Bruno De Conti of Unicamp for the brilliant lectures, reinforcing the importance we attach to partnership between our institutions and in the process of producing knowledge and internationalizing our research and academic exchange activities, and in our comprehensive understanding of the world. Thanks a lot for being here with us, and see you soon. Goodbye. Thanks a lot.